Welcome to the reality show. It is day 20 of the war in Israel. I think this is one of those episodes. Let me introduce the panel and then I'll talk about the issue with this episode. I am joined today by Anders Ingemarsson, by Matthew Humphreys, Michael Liebowitz, and Robert Nasser. Now the title and thumbnail. This is one of those episodes. I think we've had a few of them during this war, where I have to say, anybody appearing on this panel, by appearing, is not necessarily endorsing the editorial decisions that I made regarding the title and thumbnail. So this episode, we called it Jews for Palestine, and I put a picture that Daniel put it, but on my request, a picture that could be considered controversial, but I really, when I read, these Guardian articles, there have been a few of them, whenever somebody of a Jewish background comes out, in support of, they won't say it this way, but in support of Hamas, this is something that the anti-Israel crowd loves. They love to put them forward as at the forefront of their their propaganda, and it disgusts me enough to take the route that we did with the thumbnail. I'll have more to say about it. Let's hear what the panel has to say. Robert, your thoughts on this?
It's amazing that this writer in this article that we're working from here today is angry because we are weaponizing the Holocaust. And yet that's exactly what he's doing with regard to the post-Holocaust. He's got 800 Holocaust experts who are saying it's an outrage that we bring up the Holocaust in this context, because 1,500 Jewish people, American people as well, they weren't all Jewish, have been killed. 4,600 Gazans have been killed. And even then, it's wrong to connect it to the Holocaust. And then how does this article end? Precisely with bringing in, we have to go back to what started all of this. And what started all of this? Well, of course, the actions that occurred right after the Holocaust. It is beyond outrageous. There are connections to be made to the Holocaust, notably in the fact that the goal of the enemy is the elimination of the state of Israel and of the Israeli people, the driving of the people of Israel into the sea, which means to their death. And sure, the numerical comparisons might seem hyperbolic, 1,000, 2,000 people compared to the millions killed in the Holocaust. The specific atrocities, they totally compare. The number of Palestinians killed in Gaza has surpassed 4,650. Well, this is war. This is a war that Israel neither started nor wanted. This is a war started by Hamas. They committed the attack on Israel. And it wasn't just a military attack. This was an assault on civilians that included not just the murder of women and children and the elderly and disabled, but unfathomable, unspeakable acts of rape and torture and mutilation and desecration. And they want a quiet, proportional response. And speaking of proportionality, what the hell would be proportional? Should Israel have responded? No, not with 4,600 Gazans killed. No, should we have responded? Should they have? No, I'll say we. Should we have responded proportionally? Can you imagine telling IDF soldiers, here are your instructions on how many Gazans to go out and rape and torture and mutilate? Should we have committed an equivalent number of atrocities? So that's just the beginning of my criticisms of this article and this idea.
Yeah, I mean, Israel neither wanted nor started this war, as you said. It still doesn't want it, and it doesn't seem to want to believe that it's happening, and it's still not really fighting it. And I think it can end badly. And of course, this is not what you'll hear from Jews for Palestine. Michael, your thoughts?
Well, this article stems from the comments that Joe Biden made. And all he said was this was the most deaths for Jews since the Holocaust, which is a factual statement. So I don't really know what the author's issue is with that, especially because later in the article, the author states the exact same thing, that it's been the worst day for Jews since the Holocaust. So I don't know where what his issue with that is. I think there's a kernel of truth in what he said, but not applicable to this case, in that there are people out there often that make inappropriate comparisons, not just to the Holocaust, but they'll say a given presidential candidate is like a Hitler, or, he's a fascist. When I think that when we do that, we water down terms and we make things seem other than what they are. And the other day, for instance, I had a mini debate on Facebook where a guy said that what 1930s Germany was to the Jews. And he said, and now in America, in present day America, people that are in the MAGA movement have to be afraid. And to me, that type of comparison was absolutely disgusting. So as far as that goes, I think these comparisons and analogies can go too far. But in this case, I don't think it does at all. The Joe Biden wasn't saying this was as bad as the Holocaust. In fact, the very statement, it's the worst since the Holocaust, implies that the Holocaust was worse. Otherwise, you would say this was the worst ever.
Yeah, the amount of Nazi comparisons that are out there give, justifiable Nazi comparisons a bad name. But
Yes.
I definitely think around this time, the comparison is right in many ways, because it's not just the specific acts that were committed, where again, it's not just murder, it's the worst type of murder, and in some cases, not murdering, keeping people alive in a life that might be even worse than death. And it's the fact that, like the Nazis, Hamas killed as many Jews as they could. The number was much lower so far, but when we look at the enemy, we need to look at who they are and who they want to be, and what they would like to do, and fight them accordingly. Thank you, Jonathan, for the generous super chat. Matthew, your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree with what's just been said. I think. I mean, the sense in which Biden used it, which the author of the article is criticising, Biden is making a valid historical comparison. He's saying it's the most deaths since the Holocaust. He's talking about it in relative terms. It seems, certainly to me, to be a valid statement. I don't really understand what argument the author of the article thinks he's making, because he actually doesn't make sense. And I know it's off topic, but just picking up on something Robert said, this whole thing with proportionate or disproportionate force in terms of the response. I keep seeing this notion of proportionate force being misunderstood all over the place in the way it's being reported. Proportionate force in international law means force proportionate to the military objective you are trying to achieve. It doesn't mean using sort of equivalent force to your enemy. It means you have to be proportionate to what you're trying to do, which would be, well, they haven't said they're trying to destroy Hamas, but they've said they're trying to destroy Hamas's capacity to repeat this or to attack Israel again. So whether what they're doing is proportionate ought to be judged by that standard. I appreciate it's off topic, but it just I keep seeing it discussed strongly in the media.
Well, one of my favorite, actually my favorite moment when it was discussed in the media was when Julia Hartley Brewer was interviewing Douglas Murray, and she asked him about this idea of proportionality. And look it up. He gave a perfect answer. This was, I think, 2 weeks ago today, or tomorrow. It was about 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I was very disappointed in Julia Harvey Brewer there. I had a much higher opinion of her before seeing that than I did after. But yeah, the way she asked it, and the way the way it's often discussed is, this is what Hamas did. Israel shouldn't do more than that, and of course, there's no way for Israel to win if they do that. Anders, your thoughts?
Well, proportionality, I think that's a term we can use in cooking, but it shouldn't be used for war at all. I think it has its roots in altruism, like much else in this discussion. As for Biden's comment, I agree with the previous speakers that, I didn't see anything really wrong with that. I could have wished that he would have maybe tied it to a larger context and said, this is the worst day for Western civilization since 9/11 and the worst day for Israel since the Holocaust, or something like that. But then the rest of the article, I'm just so tired of reading this stuff. I'm sorry. But when we're talking about overusing terms and such, one thing that hasn't been discussed enough, and I think we should bring up, is, back in World War II, at least as I understand it, there wasn't too much criticism about the carpet bombing of Germany, or the carpet bombing of Japan, and the atomic bombs, the dropping that, we know that was a lifesaver for America, and it has been criticized, obviously. But I think those kind of comparisons are worthwhile doing here, because we're talking about an enemy that you want to annihilate, right? And I'm sorry, and in Palestine or in Gaza, there are very few innocent civilians. Those of voting age back in 2006, most of them voted for Hamas or Fatah, or some minor faction that held similar views. And yet children are children, and they are innocent, and that's very unfortunate. But there are subjects of their guilty parents, and that's just life. Now I do agree that there is a risk that we overuse some of these terms, like Holocaust, like Nazis, fascists, slavery, and others. But Biden, in this case, I think I didn't have a problem with.
Yeah, this issue of innocence, I completely agree with you. Yeah, as far as the adults in Gaza, I don't sympathize with any of them, and the reason I don't is because I've been following this, and I mentioned people who have who watched the Daily Objective right before this show. I mentioned the lynch in Ramallah, which was they just heard that there are Jews there, the people of Ramallah, all without thinking about it or discussing it, just went and slaughtered and lynched the Jews who were there. This is the Palestinian way of life. This is their way of thinking. And one of the worst interviews I've heard in the past couple of weeks, this was on Israeli television. A soldier was talking about how he repeated in like 2 minutes several times how we're so moral, and he said, we saw people flooding on October 7th. We saw them taking down a part of the fence and flooding through it, but we didn't see that they weren't armed. We didn't see any guns. So we have our rules. And our rules said you don't shoot at them. So what if they're coming into Israel? Maybe they're, coming to work illegally or something. So, and again, throughout this interview, he repeated several times how moral the Israeli army is. And this is, I think this is something that we are unique in our understanding of, which is if your morality says you stand there and watch savages flood into your country on their way to commit the most horrendous crimes, against the people that it is your job to defend, you are not moral. That is not the moral thing to do. And yeah, unfortunately, that is still the view of morality in Israel. I think Israel is still paying for that and will continue to pay for it. Any thoughts on that, Robert? I had another point about the article, but we can get to that in a minute.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump to the end of the article because the writer quotes this group of 800 scholars of international law. These are Holocaust and genocide studies experts. And they say this, and we want to talk about overusing terms. We are compelled to sound the alarm about the possibility of the crime of genocide being perpetrated by Israeli forces against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This is on October 5th. This is 1 week after the crime of the century. They go on. We do not do so lightly, recognizing the weight of this crime. They're asking for forgiveness in advance, but the gravity of the current situation demands it. And the writer goes on. These are scholars whose work has shaped the field of Holocaust studies. He says, this is significant. More and more Holocaust and genocide studies scholars are refusing to allow the continuation of the dangerous use of the Holocaust to distort the historical reality of the Holocaust and Israeli mass violence against Palestinians. This provides some hope in these dark days as it supports the struggle for a different future beyond the Israeli settler state, a future that should be based on equality, justice, freedom, and dignity for all people who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Can you believe this vicious piece of work is willing to end his article with dignity for all the people who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea? This last statement, it's shocking, but it's also telling. This scholar, Siegel, he must be familiar with the anti-Israeli chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which I'm sure Siegel knows. And this is not just me. I looked up, even the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, says this implies the dismantling of the Jewish state. Indeed, this rallying cry has long been used by anti-Israel terrorist organizations such as Hamas and the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is Marxist-Leninist, if you want your communist version of the Hamas. There they are. They know what this means. This vicious clown ends his article with equality, justice, freedom, and dignity for all the people who live between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. With ending his article that way right away, we can say we can't take this person seriously. He talks about genocide and uses the language of genocide. Talk about overusing terms like Holocaust. Yeah, river to the sea. You want to talk about overusing terms, you piece of work, you. That's what I have to say about this article and about anybody who sympathizes, including these 800 supposed scholars, with the criticisms of using terms like the Holocaust in conversations about what's happening right now in the Middle East. That's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, by the way, I think we've given up on our attempts to keep the language family friendly during these weeks on the shows. Although, Robert, I appreciate how you're holding back and then use a family friendly word. Yeah, I had something to say on this, but I forgot, so I'm going to go to you, Michael, and then I'll hopefully remember.
Okay, speaking of terms that are overused, and Robert mentioned genocide. I've been seeing a lot lately articles and comments of people referring to the Jews as colonists, that it's colonial oppression and that sort of thing. But to set up a colony means one country occupies another or settles in another and inflicts law and control over another country. So if they're talking about originally in 48, the Jews weren't representing any country by which they could come colonize the area, nor was there any country there to colonize. And if they're talking about after 48, when there is a country of Israel, what are they colonizing? There's no country of Palestine to colonize, but yet they use that language. I mean, it's like the left has a lot of buzzwords that they like to use, and that's one of them: oppression, colonization, racism, sexism, that sort of thing. And they just, you talk about, like Robert said, words being overused. This is just the sort of the litany of expressions that they like to use to make their case and substitute for rational argument.
Yeah, and you know, I think we've said how, you know, this kind of language is used, you know, in part to basically, you know, to cover up the issue and cover up the real views. Now, I think in some cases it's to cover it up from anybody who might be listening, because if you want to sell the type of views that certainly people who support Hamas actually hold, they're not that marketable. You know, if you cover it up in nicer words, it'll work better. And I wonder in how many cases people actually buy their own, I'm going to say bullshit. Sorry, Robert. I was thinking of a you know, a family-friendly way.
Oh my God, what's next? You just said bullshit. Next, we have anarchy over here.
But one of the things, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen the meme, you know, gays for Palestine and then, you know, chickens for KFC. But this is a real thing that you see in every anti-Israel rally. You see gays for Palestine. Now, I've seen at least one video where they're attacked. Somebody is attacked with who's there with an LGBT flag. Maybe that'll be a wake-up call. Although I'm sure they'll if they've rationalized up to that point, it's not that much work to rationalize a bit more. But yeah, it makes me wonder how. You know, what is the way forward with you know, such people who might maybe be you know, open in some way to reason. Matthew.
Oh, well, I think the way forward, if you really want everyone to live in freedom and dignity from the river to the sea, that section of the article that was just quoted, you start by eliminating Hamas and all these other terror groups that are trying to attack Israel, because anywhere around the Middle East, the only country that comes close to giving people the kind of rights they have in the West is actually Israel. It's not going to, it definitely doesn't happen in the Gaza Strip and Hamas, and it doesn't really happen in any of the Arab countries to any significant extent, as far as I understand their legal systems. So, you know, if you want freedom and dignity, you've got to get rid of the terror groups and get rid of the dictatorships.
Yeah. Now, when we look at you know, the political discourse around this, and you know, I saw this tweet by Diane Abbott. Those of you who are not in the UK probably don't know who she is. Lucky you. But she's a member of parliament in the UK, and one of the worst, which is, you know, it's really you know, that's an achievement. There's 635 members of parliament. Some of them are really bad. Being one of the worst is it takes a lot. And she tweeted something like, I don't remember the exact words, but something like, well, look at what they're doing to the Palestinians. If this was done to Ukraine, you know, people would, and this is something I've seen more and more from the anti-Israel crowd. They're trying to make it look as if, you know, siding with Ukraine and siding with Hamas is the same. And of course, on the political right, we see people who side with Israel, but were also kind of sympathetic to Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war. So, you know, if you actually try to look at, try to find reason in the, you know, left-right political spectrum, that's looks to me like it's difficult to do. But Anders, you literally wrote the book on that, so I'm going to go to you on that question.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no easy answer, obviously, but it's a question of just flying along and especially attack the moral foundation of what they believe in, you know, because that's what we have to expose. And I don't know about the obviously they come on a spectrum, and some may be possible to where you can influence them to change their mind. For others, I think you have to just keep in mind that the people that you're directly attacking or criticizing, that's not your audience. The audience is the people who are following those people, because that's where you have people who are more open probably to a valid argument. Some of them are. So I think that's something that is important in your activism to always keep in mind. There was an article in the Free Press. Those of you who are not in the US may not be familiar with it, but it's Barry Weiss, former editor of New York Times. She was thrown out a few years ago, and she started the Free Press, which is a pretty good center-left Substack publication. They had an article a few days ago about people for whom this event, or rather the reaction to the events here in the US with the universities and the student organizations, demonstrations, and so on, that really was a turning point in their support for the progressive left. I thought that was interesting to hear. I believe it when I see it, but there is certainly a debate going on here in the US about, purging perhaps the worst elements on the extreme left. And Robert Troshinsky wrote an article the other day where he commented on the same theme, calling for, for the center left, or liberals as he called them, more in the classical sense, to really rid themselves of this ballast that they're carrying with them. And I think also politically in the US, there is a concern in the Democratic Party that they're actually losing votes because of those progressive left. So there are some positive signs, but it's just a question of plugging along and never give up.
Yeah, and I definitely think there are people who end up on the left or on the right just because they look at the political spectrum, they look at what's, if you focus enough on one side, you will go to the other side. There are reasonable, honestly mistaken people out there who are not objectivists, or as I say, not yet objectivists. And this is where we do our self-promotion and tell you to please share this with them if you know any of them, or anything else that you think is valuable. That really helps. We know many people, most objectivists, vast majority of objectivists who I know were not, raised by objectivists. So they discovered it somehow, often by somebody encouraging them to read or watch something. So that is the long game. We are it's not going to influence the next presidential election in the US or the general election in the UK. But it is the only way actually to save us in the long run. So there's all right, we try to keep it at a higher level, but I'm gonna dip a bit lower now and look at some of the comments and read them. So Rob mentions that Diane Abbott wore 2 left shoes at a public event once. All right, so Diane Abbott, again, this is for the people who know who she is. This will not, I don't like it when we call our political or ideological opponents stupid because we're kind of letting them off the hook. But she is a real combination of evil and stupid. And then Apollo Zeus adds that she and Jeremy Corbyn were lovers in the 80s. Thank you for that mental image. Okay, so there's the issue in the article where he's talking about people in Gaza being displaced. Now, I never remember these numbers. The numbers that the anti-Israel crowd gives you always come from Hamas. They are always a lie. It might be a lie that is based on a true story. If I tell you I'm 7 foot tall, I'm most of the way there. But in that way, it's based on a true story. If Hamas tells you there are deaths, there are deaths. If they tell you there are 600 billion deaths in Gaza, that's probably not the correct number. And whatever the number they do say is also not the correct number. I don't see any mention in this article elsewhere of the fact that 200,000 Israelis have been displaced. People in the Gaza Strip, around the Gaza Strip, obviously the people who, many of whom were slaughtered, but the people who are still with us. They're not there. They've been moved to hotels elsewhere in Israel. The people in the north, near the Lebanese border, have also been moved. They've been told it's not safe to stay there. So that's and I saw an article today saying they shouldn't expect to be home this year. So yeah, this is not something that that you see in the media and in the media in the West. And it's necessary for them not to talk about that. It's necessary for them to maybe pay some lip service and say, yeah, so many people were murdered in Israel and that's not okay. But, and then, the bulk of their writing follows. That's going to be like a sentence or two. Yeah, Robert, any thoughts on the fact that this is, they're completely focused on the supposed things that Israel does, which of course they enhance greatly in the way they tell it, but almost completely ignore anything that happens on Israel's side, outside of the fact that it is the whole war as Hamas is doing, but they ignore the actual facts there.
Yeah, well, I like doing my top 5 shows. So since I'm not doing shows, and since you brought it up in the previous episode, why do people support Hamas? Hamas is the underdog, and altruism loves underdogs. But also people have accepted as true that Britain or Israel as colonist imperialist narrative. They've accepted it. You listen to these calls for us to accept the Nakba, the idea that Israel were colonists who took over existing land. And number 3, you've got the numbers, more Palestinians than Israelis have been killed. That's just QED right there. Number 4, you can't deny that just raw anti-Semitism, including the ugliest kind of envy for the kind of earthly success that the Jewish people have had over the centuries. And number 5, there's moral equivalence. Killing is bad. Yeah, this killing, that killing is bad wherever it happens. Both sides are bad. And really, if Israel would just go away, there wouldn't be any more killing. So Israel is more bad. That is why people support Hamas. That's what I see. And especially in the non-crazies, it's so easy to look at the worst of these people, like this clown who wrote this article. But in reasonable people who are taken in, that is exactly what I see. They've accepted that narrative. And unfortunately, because the answer to it isn't simple, it's a real challenge to get somebody to sit down and listen for 5 minutes or 15 minutes to, for example, Yaron Brook explaining, no, here's the history. Here's what was going on in 1947. And here's what was going on in 1948. And here's what mandated Palestine meant as a quote unquote nation, as a British protectorate after World War I. It's a complicated story. People just like the short version of, well, there were people living there and Britain said, no, these other people get to live there. Oh, well, that doesn't sound fair. And that's all they know. Now, why are they so eager to accept that narrative? Then we get into all of those other reasons. It's that simple, in that people want the simple answer, and that's what they see. If it wasn't for altruism, if it wasn't for the culture we're in, I think people would be less eager to accept it and more likely to look for the real history behind it.
So we have a few super chats. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Apollo Zeus. Thank you, Ashley Shrugged. Enric, thank you for the super chat right at the end of the daily objective, and thank you for this one as well. Enric asks, are there rules of war beyond winning? So we'll get to everybody on this, and everybody can answer. It's a good question. I also wanted to, Robert, you mentioned Yaron Brook. We've been mentioning for the past 8 days this event we had in London, which was a ARCUK members only event, and it was about Israel. We will probably release the full video of that at some the full audio of that at some point. We don't have a video, but there is a clip from it on the Briefly Objective. Daniel, if you can share that in the chat, we posted a couple of days ago. There might be more. It's the Briefly Objective has the the audio edited with video and stuff. So it's yeah. But one thing Yaron mentioned during that meeting is he like just off the cuff he said we don't know where this is going, and the Houthis might fire rockets from Yemen, and the next day the Houthis fire rockets from Yemen. Like, Yaron is the world's best commentator on the Middle East, and yeah, I absolutely recommend, if you're not already following him on this topic, you should. And of course you should share the Briefly Objective video of him so we can so people can watch that, and of course subscribe to the Briefly Objective, our other YouTube channel, if you're not yet subscribed. Michael, just based on the fact that historically you and I have disagreed on things, I'm going to go to you on the question of the thumbnail, because so the thumbnail, for people who haven't seen it or didn't get it, was this is a picture of a capo officer in a concentration camp. In the concentration camps, they had prisoners who were officers, that were appointed by the Nazis. Of course, basically your choice was, get the horrible treatment that you would get as a regular prisoner, or get a slightly less bad treatment as a prisoner who is an officer and has some power, of course, only over other prisoners. It's a way of turning people on each other
until they killed them, right?
Yeah.
Until the Nazis were done with them and killed them.
Yeah, and that's mostly the point of my comparison. Now, the problem for me, there was a problem with this comparison. The problem is they had basically no choice. Like they were faced with impossible choices. The Jews for Palestine, gays for Palestine, all these people who, if they lived in a Hamas-controlled Palestinian state, would be executed just for being, who they are. They have a choice, and this is the choice they make. So, yeah, Michael, what do you think about this comparison that we made here?
I don't like it. so you asked the right guy. I don't. It's one of those examples where I think that Nazi concentration camps, and like you just said, I mean, like, I've had a lot of heated arguments. I don't know about heated, but I've had a lot of arguments with guys about subjects like these where they say, well, the capos, they're sellouts. And I said, well, that's real easy for you to say from the comfort of where you are right now. But if you were in an actual concentration camp up to your neck in blood and death and suffering, and could alleviate your suffering a little bit, I'm not saying it's morally justified. I'm just saying that it's a very difficult decision. And these guys, I mean, these are writers. Plus, those guys didn't actually support the Nazi cause, the capos, right? I don't know if this guy that wrote this article is mistaken, if he's lying just to get, to get publicity for his article or what. So I don't like to call somebody, put somebody and equate them with Nazis because they have a disagreement with me, even if I think their disagreement is reprehensible. But ever since you mentioned this at the beginning, I've been dying to ask you a question. Do you think that it's worse? Because the title is Jews for Palestine. And the implication to me is, and I might be wrong, is that that it's worse if a Jew, a non-Israeli Jew, this guy's not Israeli, takes this position or empathizes with Hamas or favors Hamas. Is it worse because it's a Jew than if anybody else did it?
In a sense, I wouldn't necessarily say morally, but there's a sense in which it definitely, hate to use this word, but it feels worse. It feels worse because if you are the person who's targeted, you would be, the people on the Hamas side would kill you. And we talked about this woman who's taken hostage who worked in B'Tselem, which is the Israeli, what do they call it? Israeli Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, I think is the description of the organization. You know, she isn't, you know, she's an elderly woman. She wasn't one of the two elderly women released. You know, they don't spare you. They many of the people they slaughtered were in kibbutzes. You know, they are very much of the left. You know, there's this picture of a sticker of an organization called Peace Now, which is a very left-wing organization that deals with the conflict and puts the blame on Israel. The sticker and you know, the shattered glass of the window because you know, somebody shot it or something. Yeah, I think, you know, if you are it's more clear that a Jew is actively working with the people who really want to murder the Jews. Now I think yeah, if you're not of a Jewish background, you're probably in the second round of you know, the second circle of people they would murder. But yeah, it strikes me in a way as something that's worse.
See, my difficulty with it, and you made some good points there, but a difficulty I have with it is there's this idea that because you're a certain race or because you're a certain ethnicity, you're supposed to have certain beliefs. Remember, Joe Biden said, if you're voting for Trump, you ain't black, insinuating that all blacks are supposed to be Democrats. And I've come across that so many times where I'd be talking to guys that were learning and trying to change, you know, black guys or Hispanic guys, and members of their community would tell them basically, you shouldn't think that way because of your ethnicity. I think Hamas is evil, and that should be recognized by everybody, Jew or non-Jew. And I'm just not sure it's worse because a Jew does it, but you did make some good points that I'm going to think about.
So yeah, everybody, just to be clear, everybody who supports Hamas in my book is absolutely evil. And yeah, there's no justification for that. But just quickly on this point, do you know who Jesse Lee Peterson is?
No.
So this is a sort of radio talk show host. I am certain that he's a troll, that it's the whole thing is a joke. But he has a pretty big audience. He's black. He you know, talks about talks about black people in a negative way. He you know, he's basically a black white supremacist.
Oh, I know I think I know who this guy is. He's the guy, he said something to the effect of, you saw all the beautiful neighborhoods white people created and then black people moved in, like ridiculous stuff.
That sounds like something he would say. He also said at some point, like, we're building a ship that is identical to the slave ships that people were brought in from Africa on, so that black people can go back. Like, this is, so now he again, I don't believe that he is for real, but if there was somebody like that, there's something in there that, you know, makes you particularly question how, like, you need more, you know, you need to lie to yourself more to be a black white supremacist than a white supremacist. I'll put it that way. It doesn't make them morally worse. I don't know. They're morally reprehensible in either case. Yeah, and just one last point, Michael, just to clarify on the thumbnail, your problem is with you think it's unfair to the capo to be compared to the
No, I don't think I think it's just an unfair thing, given that the capos were up to their necks. They were, I mean, as much as I would say I understand how they could act that way, they still were taking part in torture and, you know, oppression and all these things. These guys are writers, and I ultimately don't know their motivation. I don't know if they're just wrong or if they're actually irrational evaders. I don't know. And I don't know. There's something in when we make, this is what I was talking about earlier, when we make these type of comparisons, it just rubs me the wrong way. And it might be that I'm wrong. I just think that when you start comparing people to Nazis, you should, like Hamas, I don't have a problem. They're butchers and they're murderers who want to see no more Jews. But this guy's a journalist who wrote an article where he didn't even justify Hamas. He was saying bad things about Israel as well. And as much as I think he's wrong, I just wouldn't equate him with a Nazi sympathizer or somebody working for the Nazis. All
right. This is becoming the Michael and Razi show, which, by the way, sounds like a great show that we should all see at some point. But I'll give James Valiant the last word on this topic. So James says, it's not racism to be worried about racists. Matthew, your thoughts on anything that has been said since last time we came to you?
I think I agree with what Michael just said, actually. I think it's, with the greatest respect, Rati, I think it's quite a problematic comparison.
I knew Matthew was a genius, smartest guy in the room.
I mean, he is my lawyer. You know, when they charge me with hate speech, he is supposed to defend me. So hopefully that clip, yeah, if we can edit it out in post. Anders, any thoughts on the thumbnail or anything else we talked about?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about Jews for Palestine. I agree with Mike that it could be misinterpreted. I mean, we know what we mean by it, but I was trying to think. So what would be a better term than Jews for Palestine? And I couldn't come up with anything. So I have to think a little bit more about it. But I do think that a piece of excrement is a valid term to use, and it may even be educational for younger people in the audience.
Well, I appreciate you also keeping it family friendly. And Robert, yeah, is an organization called Arabs for Israel coming anytime soon? And I think that would, you know, I would not put it in the same category, of course.
Well, I hate to repeat because I've played on it once already, but being an American of Syrian descent, I am absolutely an Arab for Israel, 100%. In fact, before we wrap up, and maybe now's a good time for that, I want to read President Biden's remarks. They're in the article of this person who was criticizing President Biden's statement. And I've been critical of Biden. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. I'm not a fan of Joe Biden. And his recent move to send aid to Gaza. I mean, in theory, he's going to make sure that the UN makes sure that none of it goes to arms or troops. Even if the UN does their job to the best of their ability, money is the most fungible asset in the world. It is sad and ugly and true. The dollars that go to the needy, even if they actually go to the needy, that means that whatever scraps Hamas was spending on those people now goes towards more arms and more personnel. The only way to end that is for the war to end, and the only way to end the war is to win the war. So I'm very critical of Biden, but let me just read Biden's, just a little bit of this. It will take less than half a minute. Joe Biden goes to Israel and says this on television all over the world. Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world. There is no rationalizing it, no excusing it, period. The brutality we saw would have cut deep anywhere in the world, but it cuts deeper here in Israel. October 7th, which was a sacred Jewish holiday, became the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. It has brought to the surface painful memories and scars left by millennia of anti-Semitism and the genocide of the Jewish people. The world watched then, it knew, and the world did nothing. We will not stand by and do nothing again. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Now, whatever you think of Joe Biden, these remarks were exactly what needed to be said. And these remarks are what this fool from the supposedly anti-Holocaust, anti-genocide group wants to call out. Well, I say those were exactly the right words to say. And I hope we Americans, I hope the UK, I hope everyone around the world is willing to live up to those words. I hope Joe Biden lives up to his words. We will not stand by and do nothing again. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And to hell with the bastard who wants to criticize those remarks.
Yeah, I mean, I've also said, some of Biden's, his talking about minimizing civilian casualties, the aid for Gaza, all that, it's all bad, but it's all stuff we would expect from anybody. So if you put Biden in the context of any realistic alternative in US politics, let's say any highly realistic alternative, and certainly if you put him in the context of other world leaders, and in the historical context of past presidents when Israel is in trouble, then yeah, he is he is better than unfortunately he's better than anything we can hope for. And if you look at some of the fighting words from Netanyahu, especially at the beginning of the war, that sounds great. So yeah, the words are great. Now back them up with action. Any final thoughts from anybody in the panel? Michael, let's go to you.
I'm just happy now that I know that I'm free to swear as much as I want in this program, and I'm going to have to make a list of words that I can use, and the next time I'm going to unleash. And Matthew can defend me if the FCC gets upset.
It's not the FCC, it's YouTube, but Matthew, your thoughts, and feel free to use any words that come to mind.
I don't think, honestly, I've got anything to add.
Anders?
No, not really. Just been nice to be here again and with this panel. And yeah, it's keep up the good work.
Thanks, and thank you to all the panelists for joining me today. Thank you to everybody in the chat. We are back. Do we have a briefly objective coming up in 6 minutes, Daniel?
Yes.
Do I dare ask what the title of that is?
Yes, I should have. Why people support Hamas.
Okay, that's, yeah, I can live with that. All right, that is coming up in a few minutes. Link in the live chat. If you're watching this later on, link in the description. You should already be subscribed to the Briefly Objective, but if you're not, you can do that. And yeah, we will be back here tomorrow, the Daily Objective, 5:30 UK time, 12:30 Eastern. The reality show 30 minutes later. Yeah, we'll see you here tomorrow. Thanks.